Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast presented by Twisted Tea. I'm Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com, alongside Bill Bender, our national college football writer at sportingnews.com. You can follow Bill on Twitter at BillBender92. You can follow me at Bill Trocchi and keep an eye on the main Sporting News account at Sporting News. Today, special guest, special day. Matt Fortuna from the Inside Zone is joining us after one day after Nick Saban has hung it up at Alabama. So we decided to get Matt in here before we get going. Matt, condolences from both Bill and I about your father passing away last week. Tony Fortuna, read some crazy stuff about him. Sounded like, he really lived a full life for sure. And we know that kept you out of Houston for the weekend, but just want to say best to your family right now.
No, I appreciate it, Bill. And Bill, thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind words, and kept me out of Houston, but this week it sure has kept me busy professionally, huh? I mean, it still feels surreal when you just said that. Nick Saban has retired. Even, we all knew this day was coming. Some of us thought it may even come, when it did. It's still, until you saw that Alabama press release and that Alabama letterhead saying, "Thank you, coach." It's just a reality check, right? Like, I was a college freshman in 2007, which was Nick Saban's first year at Alabama. And that's really when I fell in love with the sport and really charted my love and career covering the sport since then. And I don't know a college football, without Nick Saban in that regard. So it's pretty crazy to think about just how much he literally lorded over this entire sport.
So before we get started, remember our Trocchi Trivia contest. You guys went head-to-head last time when you visited us.
We tied, right? So we got to settle this.
Right. Here is the Trocchi Trivia question for this week. Nick Saban lost to 8 non-SEC teams in his 17-year run at Alabama. See how many you can name of the 8. We will revisit at the end of the show. 8 essentially non-conference, postseason included, needless to say. Only one school was twice. Clearly that was Clemson, not a difficult one, but we'll see how many of the 8 non-conference teams you can name that got Nick Saban when he was at Alabama. So, Bill Bender, you've been quiet here. Jump on in and see what question you have for Matt.
I get to name the 2 Big Ten schools.
Okay.
When we do that trivia question, then Matt can do the rest.
It wasn't Penn State. They got swept in the 2-game series my senior year.
So, yeah, I get those 2. But, hey, Matt, here's the first question off the top. And I've been asked this a couple times already this morning on various hits and want to get your thoughts. Do you think this retirement on some level is all the changes in college football, NIL, transfer portal, 12-team playoff, and that on some level, even though he might not say it, maybe he's fed up with it a little bit? I
think that's certainly part of it. I remember talking to someone close to Nick Saban a couple of years ago, and this was right. It's hard to pinpoint a time because Dabo Swinney's kind of always been like this, but it was shortly after one of Dabo Swinney's rants about the portal and NIL and this and that. And someone I talked to regularly said, "Look, you all laugh at Dabo. Nick's saying the same thing. He's just not dumb enough to say it publicly. Like, he's just going to retire one of these years when you least expect it because he's fed up." And I think most people in that business are. And when you're Nick Saban, you don't have to put up with it as much as everyone else does. I think the one real slip up he had publicly was calling out Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M by name a couple of years ago, which obviously led to that little brouhaha. But I thought it was pretty telling. I was at the Rose Bowl. Bill, were you there?
I was not. I was in Houston, so I missed you in Pasadena, but I was in Houston, and I did miss you in Houston. I always enjoyed talking to you there.
Well, sorry we were able to miss we missed each other, but yeah, the one part to me that I thought pretty enlightening as someone who doesn't live in the state of Alabama but follows that program closely from a distance, they lose to Michigan, and our friend Aaron Suttles, who now is the media coordinator for their NIL collective, posts a video basically saying, "Hey, Tide fans, here's where you can donate. Here's how we can raise more money, yada, yada, yada." And, Alabama was getting roasted for that. Look at Alabama looking for money for players after they lose in the playoff. And I was talking to some of the other Alabama writers in the hospitality suite after the game, and they're like, "Look, Matt, this is a fan base that's not used to this. Like, they're used to living large pre-NIL. They're not used to being like, okay, now we've got to give money in order to stay on top. And I don't think that's just a fan base thing. I think that's, a statewide thing, a university-wide thing. I mean, when you've had that nice perch, completely earned, by the way, not taking anything away from it, but when you've been the team in college football doing it a certain way for so long, and all of a sudden these new rules come in that kind of level the playing field a little bit, that's an acquired taste. And look, I'm not as well versed in the NIL world to say who's doing it better than who and whatnot. I'm sure Nick Saban, Alabama, had a good thing going in that department as well. But certainly, when you look at that among the many other changes in the sport right now, to go with the fact that he's 72 years old, I'm sure all of it in some small way contributed to this decision.
Yes, that kind of leads me to my question. Well, scale of 1 to 10. 10, shocking. 1, not shocking at all. Where were you yesterday?
6, 7. Like, I was shocked when I saw the news. It's not like I woke up yesterday expected this news to drop. And everything we hear about Nick Saban throughout the day, he was interviewing, for positions, and he was on SEC coaches calls. Like, he was going about his business as usual yesterday. So for it to drop yesterday was certainly shocking. I will say, August 23rd on the Inside Zone, my number one bold prediction for the year was Nick Saban was going to retire at the end of the year after winning a national title. We'll forget that second part, although he came closer than I think a lot of us would have guessed a few months ago. So it went the way I thought it would go whenever this was going to go down. That doesn't make it any less surprising. You throw in the fact that Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick kind of sandwiched him in that retirement or firing in Bill Belichick's case, probably news cycle. It's a lot to take for a football fan who grew up really, watching or worshiping at the altar of those three guys. So look, any way you slice it, it's definitely surprising, but we knew this day was eventually going to come.
So for me, talking to people in Houston, I made my way around. As you know, I maybe made my way around to a drink or two on the way. But the general consensus was he was coming back. He's not retiring. He's not going to do this. Do you think he stays in the college game in some way, over whether it's game day or? I was thinking, wouldn't he be kind of the perfect guy to be a leadership role of some sort as we get into this 12-team college football playoff era, maybe even on the committee at some point?
I was saying, if he's not on an ESPN set at some point next season, it'll be a bigger upset than any upset his Crimson Tide ever faced on the field. He speaks in a very monotone nature, but when he speaks, you listen. He is such a great public speaker, and he's so good on those game day sets that he's got an open invitation for a job on one of the next year. Now, does he want to do that every week? Probably not. But I would expect to see plenty of him publicly in that realm next season. As far as what he does next, I don't know, right? Like, I'm sure he'll have some say in who succeeds him. They're not going to, I think, keep him completely in the dark here. Will he be around kind of in the shadows, in the background, the way Coach K is at Duke right now? I don't know. He doesn't strike me as a guy who's just going to go retire to a beach somewhere and just relax the rest of his life. Like, I just don't think that's in his nature. So I'm sure he'll be around the sport in some capacity. And I know all of us at one point or another over the last decade have said, hey, college football needs a commissioner, and who would be better to run the sport than Nick Saban? That sounds great in theory. I don't think that's actually going to happen or anything like that. But I expect we'll still see plenty of them. I mean, 72, he's still a young man, at least for his age. I mean, the guy damn near won another national title last week.
So, Bill, this is before Bill went off to Houston. One of the story ideas I had for him was to go around to all the national media guys, 10, 12 guys, and just do an informal, anonymous survey. Who should be the Alabama coach? Who should be the next Alabama coach? And Bill's like, all right, yeah, that's a good idea, whatever. And then, Bill, you pick up the story from here. What happened when you started talking to people about it?
Well, I talked, Brett McMurphy and I are friends, and Brett said, I can hold Brett to this too. Brett was like, yeah, he's not going anywhere. We were literally talking about it. And, Reese Davis and I bumped into him at Media Day, and he said, yeah. And the way he couched it, I liked. He said, to even name somebody else now would be disrespecting what Nick has done. And, so my thought was, Bill, we're not running that. There's no way he's retiring. And of course, I'm at my son's basketball practice last night, and I was like, you're kidding me. and traffic was bad on the way home, but we got the content done. So that's kind of where I'm at with that, Bill. Is Matt? We talked about the surprise level, but generally, and Mike DeCourcy wrote about this for us, they have a plan in place. Do you think Alabama had a plan in place for this to happen?
I think Greg Byrne's been there long enough and has been in the business long enough. Like any good athletic director, he's got a list and he's got a game plan of attack, whether it's in a file cabinet somewhere in the back of his brain of, this guy's not going to coach forever. I'm going to have a big decision to make whenever he retires. Let's, now it's time to activate that. And I will say, to back up for a minute, I don't think Nick Saban's getting enough credit here. He's retiring at the top of his game. I mean, how many of these older coaches who had so much success in a previous life just hang on because they don't want to give it up? And it never ends well, ever. Even Jim Boeheim last year at Syracuse. It was an awkward exit. It should have been better. So credit to Nick Saban for walking out on his own terms and making this a lot easier on everybody. He's been doing this at such a high level for so long that I'm sure if we regurgitated some of the past lists and similar stories we had over the years, we get a good laugh out of them. I mean, his coaching tree is so big that I'm sure for much of that time we thought, oh, it'll be Steve Sarkisian or Kirby Smart, or, someone who worked for him, Billy Napier. You look around right now, I mean, Kirby Smart's not leaving Georgia. I remember broaching this topic with someone, a search firm guy last summer, and I brought up Sark, and he's like, Sark wins big this year. He's got a better job at Texas than he does in Alabama, which is true. And they're going to the SEC. So it's Alabama. It's a huge job. There's a lot of pressure, but these guys have egos, and they all think they can win big there and want to win big there. So it's not like it's hard to find a good candidate there. But when you really hone in on it, especially at this time of the year, and you look at the financials, I think you're looking at a select group of maybe 5 candidates or so, right? If this was a couple of years down the line, I thought maybe he'd put the whistle on Tommy Reese's neck and deem him as his coach in waiting or something like that. I don't know at the age of 31 if that's going to happen now, although I do know Nick Saban thinks very fondly of him, and I believe is meeting with him this week to go over kind of future plans. Dan Lanning, I think, is in a similar boat. He's 37. He was a GA at Alabama in 2015. He's a popular name now. When he elected to stay at Oregon in the fall, in the back of my mind, I thought, that could be the next Alabama coach one day. But again, I'm thinking about that 2-3 years down the road. I don't know. I mean, if you're looking between him and Kalen DeBoer, Kalen DeBoer is better, plain and simple. I'm not saying he's a better fit down south, but the guy's 3-0 against him. He's got a better overall record, and he took over a much worse situation at the exact same time than Lanning did at Oregon. 2 guys I really would keep an eye on. One a bigger fish than the other. Dabo Swinney, I still think you can't ignore him. I know he's not the flavor of the month he would have been 3 years ago, but I also think that might make him more receptive to the idea, because I would have 2-3 years ago said he's at Clemson for life. He'd be stupid to leave. Now, you see the Tyler from Spartanburg calls, you see some frustration. It's home for him, right? Like, that's going to be a very, very hard call for him to ignore if they pick up the phone. And the other guy who I think would be a home run, and the last 24 hours or so, I've convinced myself that I think he will be the guy, is Mike Norvell. Guy's won big everywhere he's been. He completely renovated Florida State. It took him 4 years to take them from a losing program to a program that ran the table this season. And let's face it, I know Florida State fans don't want to hear this, but Florida State thinks they hit their ceiling in the ACC, which is why they're trying to get out of the ACC. I'm sure Mike Norvell experiences some of that, right? And he's got to be looking around himself at the uncertain future of that program. And the fact that, look, I just went undefeated here and I got left out of the playoff because of Alabama. That's not going to happen at Alabama. And I'm going to have better players at Alabama. And I know I'm one of the best recruiters in the country and can get those players at Alabama. So that's, I think, if you're asking me for one name right now on January 11th, if I had to handicap this thing, I think Mike Norvell would be the guy. But there's certainly other worthy candidates. And again, I have to imagine Nick Saban's going to have a pretty strong say in this thing.
Yeah, I like the theory, the ACC theory. That goes for Dabo too, I think.
Sure.
Getting into the SEC. My theory is Saban or Alabama wanted Sark. as their number one guy. And I don't think Saban decided yesterday he was going to retire. I think he's known for a little while. It's my guess. This is all guessing, but I think he's known. I think he would have had an opportunity to say it after winning the SEC championship that I'm stepping down after the college football playoff. And if they had targeted Dan Lanning, and he announced that in the first week of December, right? And it motivates his team, whatever, gets a little attention on that. Not that he necessarily seeks attention like that, but I think it could have been used in a positive way for Alabama. And I think Lanning may have left Oregon before the Fiesta Bowl, and they wouldn't have had this awkward month of in limbo and that kind of thing of whatever. Whereas if Sark is their number one guy and Saban knows he wants to leave after the college football playoff and Sark's in the playoff, you can't announce that the first week of December. You have to wait. And because if you do, it becomes almost a Notre Dame situation with Luke Fickell and Marcus Freeman, and they couldn't wait for Fickell, and they hired Freeman, and they were in control of when they were going to announce it. So that's my amateur theory, is that they're going to do their best to get Sark. You make good points as to why they might not get him, but I still think that's going to be the number one stop. And then if the roulette stops on Norvell, that wouldn't be shocking either.
I can follow that logic completely. It makes sense. Especially he just beat him, you know what I mean, this year, and they're going into the SEC next year. I just think, let me ask you guys, I'm not saying this as it's trivia, the right or wrong answer. Do you think Alabama's a top 5 job?
Yeah, I think it cannot be one pretty quick. Texas is a top 5 job all the time, every day. So I'm leaning a little more toward, if I'm Steve Sarkisian, why would I leave what I've built for 3 years? I finally broke through. I went to the playoff. I'm winning 1-score games. I've got a ton of talent. I was one play away from beating Washington. And they may have beaten Michigan. Who knows? Why would I go be the guy? And that's, I guess, part of my question. Why be the guy that follows the guy? Because, whether this is Ray Perkins following Bear Bryant, how many can we run down, Matt, where the guy that followed the guy didn't work out?
One thing with Sark is that he did that pattern with the Washington USC thing, where he was the offensive coordinator at USC, head coach at Washington, went back to be head coach at USC. And
if he were to be the next Alabama coach, how many people in the history of humanity will be able to say, I was the head coach at USC, Washington, Texas, and Alabama? And by the way, to this point, still hasn't won a title at any of them. Well, I got not all that successful at 2 of them.
Well, there's a guy that coached at Tennessee and the Raiders and was a coordinator at Alabama and coached at Florida Atlantic and is now currently at Ole Miss, who took a Benjamin Button career path now. So that's going to be my way of asking you, Matt. We've talked about Dabo and Sark and Norvell, which is a good one. And here's the other one, Lane. Is there any traction possibility that Lane Kiffin is Alabama's next coach?
I would think there's some possibility there, for all the butt chewings or what do you want to call it between the two. Like, I do believe there's a mutual respect there. And really this year, I think the timing works in Lane Kiffin's favor. Look what Ole Miss did this year. Look what they did at Penn State, the number 1 defense in the country in the Peach Bowl. Not that there was ever any doubt about Lane Kiffin's coaching chops, but I don't know if he had a true signature win in his career since USC over Oregon, which was in 2011 before they beat LSU this year. The guy had a hell of a year, and he's got a really good team coming back. So I think, he's eliminated any doubt about how good he is at this job. Is he the guy to succeed Saban? I just think that would be such an acquired taste for everyone there, even though they know him. It would be such a departure from the buttoned up approach and process-like approach that we've come to know, right? You got one guy who's not on social media versus another guy who retweets everything and whatnot. I just have a hard time seeing it happening. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not saying he wouldn't be great there. I just have a really hard time, especially when you look at that coaching tree, to say, you know what, of all the guys that have worked at Alabama under Nick Saban, that's the one who's going to replace him. I just have a hard time seeing it happening.
How is Saban viewed by college football fans across the country? Like, when I say that, I mean, people resent Alabama won, but he wasn't one to troll opponents like Spurrier, for example, or, stir the pot like Lane Kiffin does on social media, like you just mentioned. So he didn't necessarily make enemies that way. Was it just an Alabama fatigue type of situation? And by and large, at retirement here, when people are talking about him, they will talk favorably about Nick Saban.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, outside of LSU, for obvious reasons, I don't think there's any true animosity toward him, right? It's a begrudging respect. I mean, we want Bama. You see that sign in every stadium, at every game day, every tailgate, anywhere you go in the country, because that was the gold standard throughout Nick Saban's time there. And I don't know if we'll see a program. I think Kirby Smart has a chance at Georgia, but I don't know if we'll see a program just lord over the sport for a decade plus and win 6+ national titles the way Alabama did under Nick Saban. I mean, there's so many parts of college football today that I think we take for granted that all started in Tuscaloosa, right? Like bloated staffs, analysts. Like none of us knew what an analyst was 10, 15 years ago. Like now you've got analysts who are former head coaches who, again, for the most part, got their start working for Nick Saban. Huge recruiting departments, exposing NCAA recruiting loopholes a lot of the times. He was very good at that. The process. I mean, again, that's second nature now. Everyone says that. Everyone uses it. Nick Saban started it. Having motivational speakers come in from non-football parts, from the military, from the media, you name it. All that seemed to start with Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa. He was just so forward-thinking with everything he does. I mean, even at the things he was maybe a little slower to adapt to, he caught up real quick. I mean, remember when Gus Malzahn came in with the hurry up, no huddle, and that was causing Alabama some problems. And Nick Saban gave the infamous quote, is this what we want football to be? And I think a lot of people rolled their eyes at the time and said, quit being a dinosaur, adapt or die. And with the benefit of hindsight, I look at that as Nick Saban saying, no, is this what we want football to be? Because we'll do it, and we'll do it better than you. Trust me. And sure enough, they went out and did that, right? They got Jalen Hurts. They got Tua Tagovailoa. They were winning national titles in a very old-fashioned way during the BCS era, kind of the way Michigan just did it against them, these past couple of weeks. In the playoff era, they completely adapted. Alabama did not have a Heisman Trophy winner before he got there. He coached 4 at 3 different positions. My favorite stat, and they put out plenty in the press release, and most of them we probably can recite off the top of our head. 49 first-round NFL draft picks in his career, and that number will probably grow with this year's class and some of the other classes still there. His Alabama players have made more than $2 billion in the NFL. Everyone got rich off this guy. Everyone. How many coaches in the SEC and elsewhere got fired because they couldn't beat this guy? How many school presidents reinvested or found a new devotion to athletics because they saw the impact that Nick Saban Alabama football had on the city of Tuscaloosa, the University of Alabama, and the state of Alabama?
I told Bill that you could make, and we walked through it, you could make a NFL team of Alabama players and go to the playoffs.
Easily.
I
mean, if we were to sit here and say an all Saban team, we'd be here all day.
Yeah, we may be working on one of those, by the way. But no, I said you may run into, like O.J. Howard. I was like, well, they don't have tight end. Well, you could put O.J. Howard there and go 4 wide with Judy and Waddle, and Devontae Smith. You're fine. You have Jalen Hurts. You could alternate Hurts and Tua if you want, like
Cooper,
Nick did. Right? Amari Cooper.
Hurts can do the short yardage for you.
Yeah, they can do that, and it's just they're the only team that can do that. Like Georgia has holes, and Ohio State has holes, and Michigan will send a ton of guys to the NFL draft this year, but they will have holes on that NFL All-American. And the way I would put it is you could say, well, Nick Saban had all the best players. That's why he won. No, he maximized what he had out of all of the best players better than anybody's ever done it for longer.
He got the best players. I mean, look,
he got the best players.
It's a great job. And I would say it probably is a top 5 job, but Georgia's better.
Right.
Texas is better. I'd argue USC, LSU, and Ohio State at least have an argument to be better. There's talent there, and there's football passion and devotion and resources like no other. But, when Clemson got good kind of out of nowhere under Dabo Swinney, I remember thinking, let's face it, Clemson's a better geographical location than Tuscaloosa is as far as access to talent. It might not be the football hotbed and historic power that Alabama is, but they're 2 hours from anywhere. They get someone on campus, they don't leave. they commit. Alabama, you're fighting with everyone in the SEC. And again, there's talent in Alabama, but it's not like you're in a suburb of Atlanta the way Georgia essentially is.
Right. My favorite Nick Saban stat is in his 17 years at Alabama, the Crimson Tide reached number 1 in the AP poll 15 times out of 17 years. Missed it his first year, missed it actually this year, his last year. Georgia and Michigan, Ohio State were all up there. They only got to 3 this year. So that was a time to hang it up.
That's retiring. You can't do it anymore.
So, all right. Well, thanks, Matt, for making time for us. Let's get back to the Trocchi trivia question and see how many of the 8 non-SEC teams that we can name that beat Alabama and Nick Saban during the last 17 years. I'm going to cross Clemson off my list, the only 2-time winner. Bill, give me your first 2, then we'll go Fortuna back and forth.
7 left then, if Clemson's off?
Correct.
Well, like I said, I reserve the right to take Ohio State and Michigan. Because
Ohio State and Michigan, both in the CFP, both off the list. What you got, Matt?
Oklahoma, Texas.
Oklahoma and Texas. There you go. Heading to the SEC now, partly probably because of Saban. We got 3 left.
All right, I'm going to leave him the last one. Utah.
Yes, Utah in the Sugar Bowl.
And the infamous UL Monroe loss.
UL Monroe. Matt, what you got? You got the last one?
I had those 7. Like I couldn't think of the 8th, although I know it was in year 1. I know it was in year 1, right?
Yes.
Bowl game.
It was 7. Clemson was 2, so that was 8 losses, 7 teams. My mistake.
I think I had the bowl game loss, and I think I have it.
Florida State
during the regular season. You are correct. Florida State in year 1, and
so
that's it. We named them all. His first year they beat Colorado, I think, in a bowl game.
That's I was going to say. Did they lose to Colorado?
They were 6-2. They finished 6. Yeah. I actually did a story a few years ago on that 2007 team and the last bad Saban team, and it's funny because you see 6 wins, 6 losses, ULM, and you're hindsight's 2020. You're trying to find the breadcrumbs that showed that a dynasty was in the making. And it's funny because Greg McElroy, all the guys I talked to were like, look, we didn't lose a game by more than 7 points that year. And that sounds like coach speak, right? Every new coach says, look how close we are. And in this case, it was true because the next year they damn near won the whole thing.
You didn't see a 16-year run of absolute dominance coming after a 7-6 season?
But by the way, can I add one more? I heard this one during the Rose Bowl when you said your favorite stat. Michigan was the favorite in the Rose Bowl over Alabama. Last time Nick Saban was an underdog to someone not named Georgia.
Oh,
wow.
Oh, I think I would get it. Like it was probably Urban, Florida.
The Tebow Cry game.
Yes.
And they won.
And they won. So here, and then before we let you go, Matt, I have one quick Alabama story from this whole thing. I was at a sports bar in 2007, and there were all these Alabama people in the bar with they had like stuffed animal elephants with them and all those things. And we were watching them play Houston. I don't remember if you remember this game against Houston in 2007. They should have lost. They ended up winning 30-24. And an Alabama fan came up to me and my buddy, and we had Big Ten stuff on, as you can imagine. We were rooting for Houston to win actively, as you can imagine. But he said, we got a dynasty coming. So he said, so whoever that guy is, wherever he is, somewhere in Alabama, he told me that to my face. And I was like, yeah, right. I was like, so whoever that guy right there, wherever he is, he was validated in that. He's probably thinking I told that guy, or maybe not, but incredible run. And it's crazy that we're talking about games from 16 years ago.
Very good.
I hope he put money down on that bet if you could do that back then.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt, again for joining us. Thank you to everyone for listening to the CFB Nation All-America podcast, brought to you by Twisted Tea on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Irish Breakdown, your source for Notre Dame football information. Enjoy the rest of your day. We're not sure when we'll see you soon, maybe after a Jim Harbaugh, stays or goes resolution there. and we will enter into the 2023 off season, heading to a new frontier, which is going to be the 2024 season. So everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you soon.